All right, and then also before we get started, I do want to let you know that this is our website for this project. So it's www.snohomishcountywa.gov/serene. And on this website, you are going to find our full version of the plan that you can read at any time, a summary of it, an executive summary. You can also find when this presentation has been done and recorded. We'll post it to this website, and we'll be talking about a feedback survey. So you also will be able to find that on this website. We also have a feature on the website where you can sign up for email alerts. And so when you go there, you'll see in this upper right-hand corner, it'll have this little envelope that'll say stay informed. You can click on that and we'll send any project updates to that email list. We also send toxic algae updates and lake health reports here as well. So if you haven't already signed up, you can do that on our website. If you want to, you can also chat to Megan Kosian or one of the hosts, or just chat to all the hosts with your email, and we can add you after the meeting as well. So, but you can do that at any time for any lake in the county. Okay, so here's our agenda today. We're going to start off with a welcome and background. This is where we'll do our introductions. We're going to be doing an invasive plant overview. So really, what are the problems in Lake Serene? What are those plants that we're concerned about? Then we're going to talk about what the goal of the management plan is and what priorities are. And these are all draft. I just should say this whole plan is draft. And the whole idea is that this is an opportunity for you all to make it your community's plan and provide input and feedback so it can be adapted as needed. So with that, we'll go along with the draft recommended actions in the plan, talk about next steps. And then the last part is really the critical part. We'll have questions and feedback. And after the meeting, we'll open up that survey for people to give their feedback more formally. So without further ado, we're going to start with welcome and background. I'm going to turn over to Ben Bergstrom here in just a second. He's with the Lake Serene Community Association. But before that, I just want to introduce my coworkers here at Surface Water Management. So Jen, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jed Oden, and I have been with Surface Water Management for 17-ish or more years now, and with the Lakes Group for the last decade at least, if not more, and excited to work with this community on its invasive aquatic plants.
Great, thanks. And then again, my name is Marissa Bergdorf. I'm also part of the lake management program, and I just wanted to give you a little brief overview of other things that we do. We're part of Surface Water Management at Snohomish County, which is part of the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. And we offer a lot of services to residents in Snohomish County. We are a utility, so you may or may not know this already, but you pay on your tax bill a surface water management utility fee. And our department does things like working on our drainage networks, our culverts and drainage system, keeping those working. We work on reducing the risk of flooding, both in streets and from rivers and people that might be at risk from that. We work on water quality, which is where we are kind of located, and we have a volunteer water quality monitoring program that some people here tonight have been involved in for many years, helping to track the health of Lake Serene. We also have our Lakewise outreach program, which I'll talk a little bit about later. We do toxic algae testing and monitoring, lake restoration work, and in some cases, invasive aquatic plant work. So yeah, that's just a little introduction to surface water. And then I just wanted to point out, let Megan, our summer intern, say hello. She's been fantastic and is here tonight to help with the moderation of Q&A. So I don't know, Megan, if you want to turn yourself on and say hello.
Hi, everyone. I'm Megan. I'm an intern at the county this summer. And if you have any technical problems during this meeting, please let me know in the chat and I'll do my best to help you out.
Okay. So that's who your county folks are here tonight. And now, Ben, if you'd like to hop on and introduce yourself in the community association, that would be great.
Certainly. So I don't know if everybody knows me on here, but most people around the lake, I think, do. We've been living here for about 8 years, and since then I've kind of been involved with the community association probably 5 or 6 years. Mark Fussell, who's also on here, he was the previous president of it, and he's kind of passed it on to me. So in these last 5 years, I've kind of tried to do a lot to bring the community back together, kind of trying to get more community events. You can see on that welcome slide there is Floatapalooza. So if you don't know about that, ask, and we can get you involved. But over the course of the last 5 years, there's been a lot of neighbors who have reached out, who are concerned about the lily pads. What can we do about them? What can we do about the other invasive weeds? And so as a community association, we had a meeting. We kind of like reached out, figured out we wanted to reach out to the county, and started talking with Marissa and Jen about what we could do, what options we have. A number of years ago, 2006-ish, we went through a similar process to go through to get rid of the invasive milfoil. So we knew there was programs out there, but this one's a little bit different. So we reached out, they reciprocated, and really got the ball rolling. So there's been a lot of hours invested into this to get us this far, and we're just hoping to keep things moving. So I'm glad everybody's here, and whoever's watching it later, thanks for participating. So that's about all I got. So I'll pass it back to Marissa.
Sorry, realized I was muted. Thanks, Ben, for that. And I just wanted to say real quick before we get going that I want to credit Mark Fussell for pretty much every photo in this presentation. He's a fantastic photographer and has been willing to let us share his photos for presentations such as this. So thank you, Mark. Really appreciate it.
I take a lot of pictures.
And here's another one by Mark. So what we want to get started today talking about is what is the problem with invasive aquatic plants? And so before we can talk about invasive aquatic plants, I think it's really important to first talk about native aquatic plants. And hopefully I just want to confirm everybody should be able to see the presentation now. If you're having any problems, again, you can message Megan. So native aquatic plants are super important to lake systems. They really are the base of the food chain along with algae. And they're fit well into the ecosystem. That's really how our lakes evolved. And one of their important functions is they're really amazing for fish. They act as a nursery with lots of little hiding spots. And the aquatic insects that they eat live and also hide on those plants. So it's an important food source for fish, but it's also important for other wildlife, birds and turtles, and especially that area along the shoreline. This is where a lot of amphibians lay eggs and that sort of thing. So not all plants are bad. Plants are very good, but these ones don't typically become as big of a problem because they do have natural controls. That being said, there sometimes do get really abundant growth of native plants. And so we're not really going to talk about that tonight, but there are a few options you can do to reduce native plants, in small areas to try and have that balance. But in general, we really want to keep our native plants in the lake because they're really important for the health of the lake. But invasive plants are a problem. And I think this picture shows it almost better than the words. If you can see on the left-hand side, a native plant community has lots of different types of plants. And so there's lots of different habitats for fish and other things to hide, where when you get invasive plants, you end up with a dense monoculture. So not all plants that are non-native become problematic, but ones that are considered invasive are those that don't tend to have any natural controls. They grow really quickly, typically, and often form monocultures. And so you end up with a very uniform system without diversity, and it may provide some habitat, but not as high quality functions as our native critters depend on. And as some of you have probably experienced in the past, they can cause nuisance conditions for recreation because of that dense growth. So it might be harder to swim, certainly navigation when you're talking about something like the fragrant water lily. It can also affect water quality. We'll talk about lilies in a little bit about how, underneath it, they can cause depressed dissolved oxygen because there's not much water circulation. And some, because there is such rapid growth that without any control, each year when they die back, it causes faster and faster, like aging. It's natural for lakes to fill in. Oh, sorry, I will try and hold my microphone. It came loose right before this. Thanks, Mark. And so it also can create these muck islands, which I think some of you have probably experienced if you're living in areas near lilies. Noxious weeds are actually, invasive plants that are considered noxious weeds are actually established by the Washington State Noxious Weed Control Board, and they're grouped into 3 ratings. So all noxious weeds have the potential to cause environmental and economic damage. And Class A ones are ones that are not in the state at all or very limited. So luckily, we don't have any Class A aquatic plants in Snohomish County. Class B ones they're not native, but it's still in some areas is limited in portions of Washington state. So it's up to certain counties to decide if they want to designate them. If it is a noxious weed that's designated for control, it means that control is required. And so an example of this is Eurasian water milfoil. Whereas other Class B noxious weeds are already, in King County, for example, it's not designated because it's already widespread there. And then finally, Class C noxious weeds are still of concern, but they're so widespread that control is optional. It's certainly encouraged, but it's not mandatory. So this will become important as we talk about especially obtaining funding for controlling aquatic plants. So just as a real quick ecology introduction, there's different types of aquatic plants too. You have shoreline plants, you have emergent plants that might be rooted in the bottom but emerge to the top, and then you have submersed plants that are underwater. So last year we went out, one of our first steps in doing this plan was to figure out what is in Lake Serene. And so we did a snorkel survey of the lake to assess all the plants that are there. And this is also something that's kind of required by the state to obtain funding, is to do a survey and understand the plants that are there. And it turns out that Lake Serene is one of the most diverse lakes in terms of native plants. We found 14 different species of native plants, which is very impressive. And, everything from the common Elodea here, which is very common, and bladderwort, that's a carnivorous plant that eats little zooplankton and floats around. So very, very cool native plant community. Unfortunately, we also found a lot of invasive plants. And so I'll walk you through each of them here. So the first, and is the most pervasive invasive plant on the lake, is slender arrowhead. This is a Class B noxious weed. It's not very common in this state or in west of the Mississippi. It's really only in Snohomish County and Mason Lake. So it is a problem, and it is a Class B because it's still not widespread. And so we are concerned about this, and it can grow extremely densely. I'm sure you've probably seen this plant. It kind of looks like a rosetta leaves, kind of strappy leaves from the bottom, and it covers much of Lake Serene. And it really has spread over the years, taking up much of all the shallow habitat. And it goes so dense sometimes, I don't know if you can see in this third picture, that one of its natural ways of spreading is it grows kind of on top of each other, such that entire meta plants might come loose and form kind of a dense floating mat of vegetation and float to a new area. So oftentimes people think that people are picking it, when really that's kind of a natural thing. But if you do pick it, you should clean up your plants and take them out of the lake, by the way. The second plant is invasive curlyleaf pondweed. And this plant, the good news about this plant is there's only a few plants in the lake that we found, which is very encouraging because this plant can be horrific. It's one of the first plants to come up as early as April or May, and it'll form extremely dense mats covering the lake up to the surface. And then it tends to die back around June or July, and its decay can cause algae blooms. And it spreads by these little things called turions that are these little vegetative reproductive parts. And so once you have a lot of turions in there, it's really hard to control because they just keep coming up. So again, if anybody has any questions during the presentation, just go ahead and use that Q&A function, and we can try and answer those as we go. Okay, the good news for those submersed plants is what we started with, is there was no Eurasian water milfoil found. So for those of you who've heard Eurasian water milfoil, Serene does not have it that we know of. So as Mark or Ben mentioned, there was a 2005 grant project. It was one of those really successful projects. We did an herbicide treatment, and we found some plants in the early years doing diverse surveys. They were to hand pull each one, but starting in 2012, we were switched to snorkel surveys because we weren't seeing it. And we haven't seen it since since I think 2012, and we presumed that it's eradicated. So it's one of our invasive plant success stories. Moving on to emergent plants, we had 2 species found. One of them you are all very familiar with. It's invasive fragrant water lily. An invasive fragrant water lily is denoted by the pink or white flower, and it has a very round pad. And it is a Class C noxious weed, meaning it's widespread. I think we have 24 lakes in the county that we know of that have it. There's probably more. So it's very widespread and can be very problematic. There is a native lily as well, though, and this is one of those beneficial plants. It can grow densely in small areas, but it doesn't tend to spread like the fragrant water lily. So it's recognized by an orange or yellow or sometimes even red ball-like flower, and it has elongated leaves more than the invasive type. So that's a good one that we want to keep. So this information is all mapped out, and there's a interactive plant map on the website that you can go to zoom in and zoom around and see these patches. But the green here is the arrowhead, the yellow is the native lily, and the pink is the fragrant water lily. And the red, you can see just these two little spots, is the curly leaf pondweed down on the, let's see, I guess that would be the east end. Okay, and then moving on to our last type of plants, there were lots of shoreline beneficial plants found, except overall Lake Serene's shoreline plants have been pretty degraded. There's lots of lawns and bulkheads and things that where the native vegetation has been removed, but when there were some remaining, it was pretty diverse. But we did find some invasives, and the first of these is probably one you've heard of. It's called purple loosestrife. It used to be a lot more widespread around the county, but there is this little purple loosestrife insects that were very successful in controlling large stands of loosestrife, but for these remaining plants, they're not as effective. So we do have some purple loosestrife out there. It is a Class B weed designated for control. Similarly, we have invasive yellow flag iris. It's a Class C Class C weed, and it is very widespread on lakes too. And both of these were brought in probably because it's a very attractive plant, ornamental plant that then became invasive. There was a question about, is there anything about promoting growth of native plants, especially the lilies? And so we'll talk about that a little bit later. Typically, when you control invasive plants, the submergent plants, the natives come back on their own. For shoreline plants, you will need to, if you take out lilies or loosestrife, you will need to replant those, and we have resources, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Similar to the others, there is also, these plants are available in an interactive map, so you can zoom in and see if your property has them, or maybe you already know. I should say this survey was done a year ago, and the mapping is pretty good, but it's possible we have our point slightly off. So it might be that we say it's on your property, it's actually on your neighbor's property, but this gives you a pretty good idea if you have those invasive plants or not. So just as a summary, this is what we found to give you an idea of the extent of the problem. Oh, I did misspoke. I guess the fragrant water lily slightly edged out. The slender arrowhead is the most prevalent at 6.4 acres. The slender arrowhead's at 6.3 acres, and 17 properties each for the iris and the purple loosestrife. Okay, so now we knew what the extent of the problem was. The second step was to develop a plan. And so this is where the Lake Serene community really stepped in, and we'll talk about a little while about the criteria that your community had to meet to receive this help. But your community met that, and so we were able to develop a plan. And we didn't just kind of make up this plan. The state Department of Ecology has a template, and it's called an Integrated Aquatic Vegetation Management Plan, which is a mouthful and kind of a horrible name, but that's what it's called. And it has each of these sections. So when you read through the plan, we had to follow their template. So sometimes it's a little redundant, but overall it provides really critical information to help guide a community to figure out what their options are for plant control so they can pick the best options for their lake. So Snohomish County did most of the legwork with the data we already had on your lake and the aquatic plant survey on this. And then we are lake scientists, but we also wanted to make sure we had the best available science out there. So we did have the plan reviewed by our contracted limnologist and Dr. Tony Pennington and Shannon Bradabo of Tetra Tech and ESA Environmental reviewed it, especially the control strategies and the aquatic herbicides in particular, to make sure we had the latest scientific research on those. So thank you to them. And at that point, then it really came along to the committee. So once we had kind of a draft plan with all the information, the committee really helped to shape the goals of the plan and to help develop recommended actions of what that they thought the community would be a best fit for the community. So this meeting is really all about kind of checking to see if that lines up and if your feedback changes some of that guidance or not. So we started, as I mentioned, with a plan goals, and the plan goal is to reduce the distribution and density of invasive aquatic plants or aquatic and shoreline plants in Lake Serene to improve recreational safety, usability, and navigability of the lake, water quality and overall lake health, and habitat for fish and other aquatic invasive species. Just one second. The second is to conduct comprehensive education and outreach covering invasive plant prevention and control and subsequent reestablish of native plants. Okay, so let's see, flipping to the next slide. Not sure why that happened. Okay, so once we had the overall goals, it made sense to then figure out within those goals and kind of the plants we're dealing with, what is our priorities? And so this is the prioritization scheme that the management or the advisory committee developed. And with each of these, there's specific management goals. And we're going to dive into the management goals a little bit more detail, but I just wanted to kind of highlight the prioritization here. So the first priority was invasive species prevention. And this was thought as the highest priority because it's so much easier to, well, it's still a difficult challenge, but it's better to be able to prevent something bad and new from getting in than having to deal with it once it's in. So it is really important to promote prevention of invasive species. The second priority was curly-leaf pondweed, and this was second priority just because it's so small right now. It seems very achievable to quickly eradicate it before it becomes a bigger problem. So that became priority 2. Priority 3, there was a lot of kind of felt like there was equal problems with the slender arrowhead and fragrant water lily. They're both highly problematic and have some very similar problems to it. So we just called it priority 3A and 3B. And then the priority 4 was a shoreline invasive species. And this was considered a lower priority because one, it's on private property, so it's a little harder to deal with. And just in terms of the negative impacts to the lake, it seemed a little less priority. So by the way, if anybody from the advisory committee, if I mischaracterize anything, feel free to jump in and correct me at any time. Okay, so we'll talk about those management goals for each of the plants, but there is a feedback question on the survey so that you can weigh in on if you agree with this prioritization or not. Okay, whoa. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how to achieve goals. So before we go into the specific best methods to achieve a goal for each plant, we're going to talk just about the universe of control methods that we looked at. So some of these we ended up recommending, but not all of them. So the first is small scale infestations is what you can do. And this is probably what a lot of you have already been trying to do if you've been trying to go and manage some of these invasive plants on your own. The first is just manual hand removal of plants and roots. And this can be a great strategy in shallow areas. There's minimal equipment costs. Anyone can really do it, but it's super labor intensive. And if you get out deeper, you really need a diver to be able to do that, to hand pull plants. The second strategy is cutting or raking. So this is popular if you are working from your dock or something and you have like a weed raiser or something where you're throwing it out and cutting the plants. This can work well for some plants. It's low equipment cost. And you can cut the flowers and seeds, for example, to prevent the spread. Oh, that's if you have iris and loosestrife, you can also cut the flowers and seeds, so you're preventing the spread. The problem with raking, there are definitely some problems though. It can remove beneficial plants. It can be super labor intensive because you really need to remove the cut plants. One, they can decay in your yard and become, or in your lake right in front of your yard and become like a algae mess there with all the nutrients being released. And if you leave them, it's going to probably float into your neighbors' properties and be a nuisance to them. There's also plants that will actually spread more by cutting. So if you cut the seed heads, for example, the lilies, and they float to another place, you're more likely to spread them. So there are some cons for cutting and raking. And the last is barriers. Burlap or synthetic materials you can put on the lake bottom. You do have to weigh them down, and they do require maintenance because as the plants decay, they bubble up and will come loose and can be a hazard for boaters or swimmers. The barriers can be really effective, and you do need to use the Fish and Wildlife Aquatic Plants and Fish pamphlet as a permit and follow those guidelines. This is limited to a small area, so you are not allowed to put a bottom barrier over your entire lakefront property. There's a certain area which you can in that booklet. And the reason is because it kills everything. So if everybody put bottom barriers all in front of their property, there would be no plants and habitat and fish, as well as the little critters that live in the lake sediments. So the other thing is if you use synthetic material, you do have to take it out after 2 years. So it's recommended that you use biodegradable material like burlap, so that way you don't have to pull it out, because it is pretty difficult to get out once that sediment starts to build up on it. If you do need to do a larger area for any reason, you have to get a hydraulic permit approval from the Department of Fish and Wildlife. So barriers are good for small areas where you may need a lake ingress, for example, but they're not a whole-scale solution. It's very expensive and difficult to do large-scale barriers. Kind of the opposite end is if we start talking about large-scale control methods. The first that people often want to do, especially when it comes to lilies, is hydraulic dredging. And basically, you have a large dredge system where you're taking out all of the sediment and the plants that come with it. So usually it's about 3 feet deep. It's highly effective, but there's a lot of barriers to this one. It's extremely expensive. Permits are difficult, if not impossible to obtain, unless it's for like a navigational canal or area like that. But to get like a whole lake edge dredging would probably be impossible. And if you do remove that much nutrients, you can cause pretty significant algae problems because there's nutrient release from the sediments. You usually have to follow it up with some sort of treatment to reduce the nutrients. And if there's shallow areas or logs, the dredge has a hard time. So this one was looked at, but wasn't really considered as a strong candidate for any of the plants. Another potential control method is harvesters. So these are simply machines that cut weeds and collect fragments. Some models are even meant to kind of dig into the bottom and pull plants up from the roots in shallower areas. These can be really effective for floating leaf plants like lilies. And most of them, it's really positive they remove the plants so you don't get that decay and nutrient release that can cause problems. You do have to cut for something like lilies 4 to 6 times a year for it to be effective over time. So it is pretty intensive. And it's not discriminatory. It's going to cut everything, native or not. And it can be really difficult. In 1 or 2 feet of water, it really can't cut things, or if there's lots of logs. The biggest problem with harvesters, though, is that there's no contractors east of the Cascades. So when you start to look at costs, we found that the only contractors would have to drive over the mountains. So the costs really increased for having to come back 4 to 6 times in a season. And I should mention that we just finished one of these plans at Lake Rossiger. So we were able to pull a lot from that plan and the research that we learned. So just if I refer to Lake Rossiger, that is why. The next one, and again, if there's any Q&A, feel free to add that in, is the next one is diver assisted suction harvesting. So we refer to it as DASH. And what you can think of like is this one is there's basically a suction dredge on a boat, and there's a diver that looks like kind of a vacuum hose, and you can kind of see it in this picture. You can basically very selectively go over a plant, hover up, and it will suck the plant out, root and all. And so it's really pretty neat because it's highly selective, especially for scattered plants. And you can target the problem ones and leave the beneficial ones. There's basically no permitting required at this time, but it can be slower. We had hoped that for slender arrowhead, this might be really effective because it's shallow rooted, but it's really hard in dense infestation areas to get work done quickly. It also, contractors basically won't do this for fragrant water lily because they have such thick rhizomes. I don't know if anybody's seen them, but they're massive. And so they have to basically cut them out underneath the sediment before they can suck them out. So it's dangerous for their divers and they're not really willing to do it. So that is, and then our last large scale chemical or control method is chemical control. And this is basically just like similar to if you had a really bad infestation of a noxious weed in your yard, you might use an herbicide. But it's very different to apply herbicides to water. So it's very rigorous approval process. They are first approved by the EPA, and then the Washington State Department of Ecology does another environmental assessment on them for health and safety. It also requires a permit, and the permit process is pretty extensive. All notifications when you apply for the permit go out to everybody that could be affected by it. There's public comment on it. If you do obtain the permit, there's all sorts of permit requirements in terms of notifications of people. You need to send a mailer or put a posting on their door, as well as you put signs up on docks letting people know as the public access sites that it's going to be treated. So there is a lot there because people want to be informed, because sometimes there are use restrictions. So for example, you might not be able to irrigate your garden for if you have water rights from the lake for a week or whatever it is for that particular herbicide. There are pros. You can get a really high level of control depending on the plant species, and it can be very cost effective compared to some other methods. Depending on which herbicide you use and what your target plants are, it's possible you could damage non-target plants. As I mentioned, there could be use restrictions for irrigation, and the permit process can be lengthy. And of course, anytime you're going to talk about putting chemicals in water, you're going to have concerns by lake residents and users. So that is one thing that we did a lot of work on in the plan to focus on, is laying out for every chemical what the human health risk, environmental risks, and treatment limitations are. And we were very selective about choosing any to make sure that they had the most favorable toxicological profile, that they would be highly effective on the plant, and that there would be a minimal use restrictions. And so from that, just to give you an idea, you can see all of these in the plan. There's 300 herbicides approved for use in the US, and only 16 are approved for aquatic use. So of those, 9 of them are effective on the target plants at Serene, and we've only recommended 5 of them for inclusion in this plan as potential options. So we were very careful about which ones we selected as potential options in the plan. One other thing that some of you may have heard about is adjuvants, and these are additives when herbicide applicators are spraying the herbicide that help the absorption or the mechanism work better. And there has been a lot of concern because some of these adjuvants actually are causing more problems to the herbicide itself. And so the Department of Agriculture reviews these as well. And so we would only allow ones that are practically non-toxic by their listing. So I think that's down to about 2 adjuvants that our applicators could use or is recommended for this plan. Okay, so that's all the control methods. So I'm just going to take a breath, and if there's any Q&A, feel free to do that. And we're going to dive into the recommended methods by management goal.
So Marissa, there was a question, do chemicals affect the stocked fish in the lake?
Okay, that's a great question. So again, of those chemicals that we chose, their toxicological profiles, I'll show each one of them here in a minute, but all have been found to be practically non-toxic to fish, mammals, or other life. So there should not be any issues with the stockfish in the lake. Great
I also
question.
want to say that on lakes that do have native species, there are fish timing windows, so you cannot treat during certain times. And if there's a time where we feel like we need to treat, but we're concerned about stocking, like when they're stocking early in April, we do coordinate with the Department of Fish and Wildlife to either stock early or hold off stocking until we feel like it's a safe environment for those little fry to go into. So there's several steps to protect fish, both stocked and native, when doing chemical control.
And one thing I should mention too, that probably it's not the chemicals themselves that can affect the fish. It's the fact that when you have decaying plants, you can cause dissolved oxygen depressions. And so that is one of the things that we look at when we work with the applicator, is figuring kind of out the maximum amount we can have without causing that depressed oxygen. And we tend to use herbicides that are slower acting, so that it may take 2 or 3 weeks for them to break down, and the plants break down more quickly, versus something that is a contact herbicide that's going to kill it right away. Then you have all the plants decaying at once. And so by using those systemic herbicides that take longer, you tend to have slower decay over time and avoid a lot of those oxygen problems. But we are not as expert on that as when we have a hired applicator that is the we work with them closely because they've had a lot of experience making sure that we don't cause any issues with fish. Okay, great questions. Okay, so now before we get started on each plan, each element of the recommendations for the plan, I do want to just point out that invasive plant control is a long-term investment. So when we talk about expectations here, we're going to talk in the 5-year time frame because we need to start somewhere, right? So for cost and planning, we're using 5 years, and that's usually when the bulk of work needs to be done and will be the most expensive years. But to truly reach goals, if we're really looking at eradication or significantly reducing and sustained reduction of something like a lily, it's going to take longer because those lilies have been there for decades and there's a strong seed bank. So even if you got rid of every lily, chances are if you didn't keep on it in some manner, those lilies are going to come back and you would have wasted your money. So like I said, we'll be talking in the 5-year time frame, but keep in the back of your head, it takes a long time for invasive plant control to work. Or not to work, but to meet your goals of eradication. You'll get 90% of what you want in the first 5 years. Okay, so priority 1, invasive species prevention. So while this is our management goal, as you remember, or what is to prevent the spread of invasive species to and from Lake Serene. And now prevention is one of the hardest things to do because you have so many people that come to use lakes. And so you're really limited to outreach. And so our recommended control method is to do outreach to encourage lake users to clean, drain, and dry boats, kayaks, paddleboards, fishing gear, anything that's coming in and out of that lake. And clean, drain, dry is a nationwide message. And so that's why we use that and kind of want to have consistent messaging everywhere. So, people can recognize that and, spread the word about it. We've already done some work on this. We've put a new sign up at the boat launch. I think this was last year, when it has clean, drain, dry, and it's a little more information graphic heavy. So rather than just words for accessibility for other languages. One other idea that came out is to potentially have on busy days volunteer outreach. This could be community members, handing out flyers or other things to reach those people on busy days. So one target audience for outreach is lake users, but lake residents also use the lake and may bring in boats and other things as well. So there's also messaging to residents themselves. It's a little easier to target these because we can do mailers, email, social media, and you do have community events, so there could be outreach done there as well. One other option is to do a boat washing station. Traditionally, a boat washing station used to mean water, a hose, that sort of thing, but they've come out with new systems that are fairly portable or easy to install. That could be a dry vacuum system or even a small station with basic cleaning tools as shown here. So that is an option to consider depending on how much, budget or the room space allowed at the boat launch and parking area. So those are potential methods that are recommended. And so I'm going to show you this graph several times. We'll just kind of keep adding onto it. And what this looks like in your first column here, you'll have your priority and the action like we just talked about for this case was outreach. And so your expected outcome is a lower risk of invasive plants entering or leaving Serene. And then we have the estimated annual cost for 5 years and then a 5-year total. Okay, so that one's the most straightforward, but also one of the most difficult. The second one is for curly-leaf pondweed. So our management goal is to eradicate the current small infestation before it grows larger. And the recommended control method is to have annual diver surveys and hand pulling until it's not found for 2 consecutive years. And then we recommend a diver survey every 2 to 3 years. And surveys have the added bonus is not only will you help address curly-leaf, but you'll detect any new invaders. So for example, if your Asian water milfoil or Brazilian Elodia is another one the lake is high risk for, came into the lake, a survey would most likely find that plant early. So you could just hand pull it and get rid of it before it became a problem. If for some reason the curly-leaf pondweed did go out of control, like I said, it is a difficult one to deal with, but the best method out there to date is the application of an aquatic herbicide panoxylum or potentially fluoridone. But again, this is only if the infestation became too large. There were no other methods that are really effective against this plant that were considered. So if we are just kind of adding on to our table, our expected outcome in 5 years is to eradicate it with monitoring following up. Now, when it came to a choice of picking what the costs were, we tend to be on the conservative side. So we don't know how many years of diving it will take to not find any plants. So the first 2 years, we estimate we would need 2 days of diving, and after that 1 day. But it might be that the first 3 years we don't find the plants. So, but we tended to try and opt for what would be the more expensive side, so that we're not giving, false expectations of what can be achieved. I do put the relevant health and safety information for the panoxylum and the fluoridone in here. This is also, you can refer to this table in the plan, but I put it in here so if people wanted to pause and read through this, they could. Okay. Priority 3 is fragrant, or 3A is fragrant water lily. It's a Class C noxious weed. The management goal is, so what we have here for both this and slender arrowhead is full eradication is a long-term goal. It's very difficult given the size of infestations. So our incremental goals are to first prevent further spread, then secondly, significantly reduce the size of the infestation and encourage native plants to reestablish, and control remaining small infestations until eradication is achieved. The recommended control method for this is using imazamox as the primary chemical treatment and imazapyr as a secondary option. Both of these chemicals are highly effective with favorable toxicological profiles and demonstrated efficacy at other area lakes. The imazamox is the first choice because it has a little bit less of a use restriction than the imazapyr. And I believe it's cheaper as well. We did put in optional control methods. So what's going to happen is after several years of chemical control, it's going to be successful, and you're going to be down to just a handful of plants here and there where it doesn't really make sense to pay for an herbicide contractor to mobilize and come out and treat a few plants. At that point, it really makes more sense to do repeated hand cutting because this can be very successful, or if it's right on the shoreline, you might even be able to dig up those rhizomes. This will become kind of a question to the community when you reach this point of how do you want to do it? Do you want to hire a contractor to go out and cut plants? Or there is a crew of volunteers that are willing to go out? Because some landowners will always be able to do it on their own, but others, might just not have that physical capability or aren't around enough. So this will be something your community would have to decide when you get to that point. We did consider a lot of other options for lilies, and I kind of already talked a little bit about why we've rejected those. But hydraulic dredging is simply too expensive with permitting harvesting. It's not very effective in shallow areas and mostly the lack of local contractors. And dash is, contractors are unwilling to perform it. So before I go on, there is a question from a participant. What about volunteer divers? So if the community has volunteer divers that are willing to go out and survey for curly-leaf pondweed, that's fantastic. The county cannot be a part of that at all for risk management purposes. So we can't make that recommendation. We can do lots of help in terms of plant ID in order to equip those divers with what they need. So that is certainly an option that the community can decide upon as, feedback they want to change the plan to use volunteer divers. But we just can't be a part of that, be a Lake Serene Association or just independent people doing that work on their own. Great question. And I should say at Lake Rossiger, we have a professional diver that goes out in the spring and does their surveys for Eurasian water milfoil, and then they have volunteer divers that help out later on that kind of organize in case anybody finds any plants after that. Okay, similar to the others, I put the health and environmental risk and use restrictions here for imazamox and imazapyr. And so you are welcome to, like if you're watching this from home, pause and take a look at these or later on, or they are in the plan. So for fragrant water lily, our expected outcome is 85 to 95% reduction in lily coverage. We estimate that's between a 5.4 to 6.1 acre reduction. This is based on what we've seen at other lakes in the same time frame. And you'll see the costs go down slightly because presumably the coverage of lilies gets lower, but you still have to pay for mobilization, so it doesn't get that low in the preceding years. Okay, the next one, priority 3B, is slender arrowhead. The management goal is the exact same as fragrant water lily. Again, it's just very dense and difficult to completely eradicate. This plant has small tubers, so anytime you are removing it, you need to remove all the tubers, and it's very hard to do that. So you might be really successful at first, but then you'll have some regrowth from those tubers. And so our recommended control method is to use the aquatic herbicide Procelicor as the first option. There is another chemical that could be used. And we are really excited about this option because, as I mentioned, this is a pretty rare plant. And so when we started planting at Lake Rossiter, we had no idea what to do with this plant. And we actually decided to use Dash as our first method in order to be able to remove the lilies, or I'm sorry, the slender arrowhead. And we thought it would be a really good fit because it's pretty shallow rooted and it's easy to pull up. But they found that it was so dense, it took much longer than we expected. We were only able to remove a ½ acre with 6 days of diving. And so we don't think that's feasible on a large scale. Just to give you a perspective, Lake Rossiter has 36 acres of this plant. So luckily you only have 6. So Dash could be done on your lake and get it, but it would be quite expensive. And so we reached out to CPRO, which is an aquatic herbicide company, because one of our scientists that reviewed the plan had found a paper showing that Procelicor may be effective on slender arrowhead. It was in rice fields on a related species. And we're excited about this because Procelicor is a new class of herbicides that has some of the best toxicity profiles around. And it takes such a tiny amount that it's also very cost effective. So we sent it in for testing. We basically harvested a bunch. They grew it out over the winter and they just tested it. And so this graph is a little hard to read, but basically this first large bar is the untreated control. And so you can see there was quite a bit of biomass with 6 parts per billion, which is a very tiny amount. It reduced it down to most, I think this is like 1 plant left basically. And with doses higher than that, it completely eliminated all plants. This last one, basically it was a 48 part per billion exposure, but they flushed it with water after 18 hours. So that's representative more like a system that might have quicker water flushing than most shallow lakes like Serene. So we're really excited that we think this can actually work. And there are typically not, at least at the doses we used for milfoil control in the past, have not had any impact on native plants. It did tend to kind of anger the fragrant water lilies. And so that was really the only side effect we saw. So that's just kind of double bonus. So we're going to be piloting this actually in 2 weeks. We're doing a treatment at Lake Rossiter. So by this time next year, we will have some really good data to see how effective that is in the field. So so that's our recommended control method. We do have an optional control method. We think Dash could work really well following herbicide treatment to do cleanup for, like I said, any remaining plants that come up with tubers and that sort of thing. And again, we'll have more information. That's the strategy we're going to be using at Lake Rossiter. We did consider other methods like mechanical harvesting, but again, it didn't seem feasible for this plant. With those tubers, we're not convinced it would be a very good approach. And again, the Dash we didn't choose as the primary option due to high costs. So that is slender arrowhead. And again, we've already shown both of these before, but these are the 2 chemicals that are possible. So again, I've just put the health and safety information from the plan in here. So this is our slender arrowhead. Now, the Procelicor is more costly than the lily treatment, but we anticipate, and this is the expected outcome is a bit of a guess based on the lab results. We're saying 80% in first 2 years and 95% in 5 years, but we'll again have more data next year. Okay, lastly, try and speed this up so we have lots of time for questions, is our shoreline invasives. And this was the lowest priority, again, because of kind of the lower impact to lake recreation and because it's on private property. So the goal is to prevent further spread and reduce coverage via education on plant identification and control methods, and also reestablishment of native plants following control. So the recommended control method is to rely on homeowners to control plants on their properties. And in order to do that, we're going to increase education, identification, and control methods to really equip them with what they need to know. So one of the strategies is to send a mailer to the residents that have that invasive with specific guidance. We're working right now actually for a couple other lakes on doing a web page for each of these plants with 1-page kind of back and forth guides on what you can do. And we're also trying to adapt existing how-to videos for RD and control. And if there aren't existing videos that meet those needs, making videos, because we've had feedback from a lot of other lake communities that, really a video that they can do at their own time and kind of be a visual learner is more effective than having a workshop or other strategies that we had looked at. And then methods considered and rejected. One other option is to hire a contractor to treat all of them on the lake with chemical control. And it's difficult to manage because you have to get individual permissions, and it's a higher cost for a lower priority objective. So, and individuals could still hire people if they wanted to as well. So this was the recommendation for those plants. One thing that the advisory committee thought was really important to stress is the replacement of shoreline plants that are invasive with other plants. And that's really important, not just for the lake, but for you as well. So it's good for the lake because those shoreline plants can trap and filter pollution, and they have much deeper roots than lawns, so they're way more effective at it than lawns. And those edge plants are so important for habitat for birds and turtles and frogs. They're also good for you, so they can help you have privacy, especially on your edges. You know, maybe you don't want a tree in the middle of your yard, but one right at the edge, or some, taller bushes. You can reduce mowing and lawn maintenance. For those of you that might have geese problems, they like to have a line of sight. So if you have vegetation that's 3 foot or taller, it'll keep geese out of them. And if you have problems with shoreline erosion, people with lawns often with, wave action, other things, it might slough off. Those deeply rooted plants hold the shoreline together. We also have our Lakewise program, and you can get free native plants to replace those. You're welcome to use ornamental as well, but we provide free native ones. We also do free site visits to help you develop a planting plan, figure out which plants might work best for your property. And we have a shoreline guide with a variety of plants that you can see and view to pick out what you think will work best, and we can help you do that. So that's through our Lakewise program. That's just one piece of the Lakewise program. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but if you're interested, feel free to go to lakewise.org or send a message in the chat. Okay, so invasive shoreline plants, this is not including the cost for Lakewise. That's already included in your services, just so you know. This is the cost estimate. And again, those higher cost estimates are in the first couple of years as we develop those outreach materials, videos, and that sort of thing. But then it's pretty affordable after that. Okay, the last piece is that the prices we gave you above are to do the actual work. It doesn't include anything for project management or the communications around the project. And so that's what this last line is. So project management would include applying for grants, reporting and management of them, hiring and managing professional contractors. There's permitting process that we talked about that was pretty extensive. And if you do get any grants, and it's just good practice, you want to monitor to make sure your project's working. So, some on the ground monitoring, just make sure, how did that slender arrowhead treatment work? The communications would be for website development and maintenance, mailers, project update communications. You're required to send certain things for permits. And then if we were moving forward on this together, we'd certainly want to have an advisory committee meeting with the county. And so the time to, facilitate those meetings. And so that's the cost estimate on that. Okay, one other thing that's a really important point I wanted to make. We talked about what your, you can expect in invasive plant reduction. So what one expectation we really want to set is that native plants will return in those areas that invasive plants have been. So you are not going to have a lake without plants. You're just going to have different, healthier plants. Especially in areas of lilies, some native lilies will remain. Like I said, they don't tend to be as pervasive and have as much coverage. They tend to be a little bit patchier. So those spaces left by the invasive lilies will have some more of the underwater vegetation. But just want to be really clear about that, because I don't want people to, we've had that happen where we do invasive plant removal and then people think all the other plants are invasive and well and need to be removed. And that's not what we expect as an outcome of this project, because those native plants will come back on their own because you have plenty of them in there to reestablish, except on the shoreline. You have to do those yourself. Okay, so if we put that all together, here is your total project cost. So over the 5 years, it'll be $271,000. I'm just going to let that set in for a second. And then I think what's going to help is if we start to talk about project funding. So project funding. And so the goal of this meeting is not to identify and decide on the funding sources. It's to give you an idea of what project funding could look like. That's really a next step. This meeting is really about approving the plan and the strategies that are there. or not approving the plan, providing feedback on those strategies so that the plan can be adapted as needed. So this first thing you can do is apply for grants. And just real quick, because I love this picture, this is a bryozoan. If anybody hasn't ever seen one, your lake has a ton of them. They are a colonial animal that eats zooplankton. We're pretty sure that they're not, that they weren't originally here, that they may have come from the east, but there's very little information known about these guys, but they tend to be indicators of good water quality. So anyway, that's a bryozoan if you've ever seen an alien brain-like thing in your lake. Okay, so funding options is you can apply for grants. And so the most obvious grant source is Department of Ecology has an invasive aquatic plant management grant. It's a $75,000 award, so requires another $25,000 on top of that as a match if you get the full amount. It is a 2-year grant basis, so they are only good for 2 years. They are paid for the boat to have fees. So a lot of people are saying, well, why isn't the state paying for this? Or people that use the lake. So this is the vehicle by which lake users can contribute to invasive plant control, because it's chances are they could have been the one to bring it in. So this is the vehicle to do that. Applications are due in November and December. That's partly why we have the timing in this now, so that if people do want to move forward on this, we are setting ourselves up to be able to apply for that. One thing I should mention is priority is given to Class A and B plants. So for Serene, this is slender arrowhead, and to a lesser extent, purple loosestrife. We have looked for other grants, but we do not know of other sources of grants at this time for lake invasive plants. And just as a track record, every time we've applied for a grant, I think we've received it. So just to give you an idea of what those odds are, as long as we have a good plan in place and put the effort in to write it nicely, the odds are pretty good on this one. The next is community contribution. So the reality is, for a plan like this to take place, the community will have to financially opt in to help with this. And so other lakes have done it through informal means. So for example, at Sunday Lake, they have formed a lake association. They formed a bank account, and they basically took donations, and they were able to fund their lily control work for about 4 years through that. So that is totally one option. You do not have to work with the county to do this work. So you can definitely do that. Now, if you are going to apply for a state grant, that's one of the reasons we're involved in this first place, is you do have to work with a county, or you have to form a lake management district, which is a formal option, is you can form a lake management district. A lake management district is basically a way to tax all properties around a lake or that could benefit from lake improvements. And it's a mandatory type of thing. The other formal option is a surface water management fee surcharge. This is one of the few lakes that already has one of these in place. So between these two, if you were going to go with a formal option, it seems less likely you would go with a lake management district. I'm not going to give you all the details on that. If we decide to approve the plan and want to fund it, I can certainly do that. But a lake management district is set out in RCW and Washington State Code. And it's very onerous to start a lake management district, and it's very costly administratively. And so we have shied away from these in Snohomish County for the most part, and tend to do the latter, which is a surface water management fee surcharge. And this is the one that's currently in place for your Lake Serene shoreline properties. And this was for the drainage work that was done. So if you did not know this, you're paying $197 extra per year through December 31st, 2027 for that drainage work. So it would make sense that you could potentially adapt or replace this when it expires if you wanted to start later, or adapt if you wanted to start earlier to also include invasive aquatic plant work. This is the process by which you do that. You develop a proposal. So an advisory committee would get together and decide, who do we want to charge? How much do we want to charge them? And for how long should this last? 5 years is kind of the maximum that they would allow it to last before it would need to go back out to the community for review if you wanted to renew that. You would then meet with your county council representative, basically say, we would like to do this. Your county council representative is going to say, well, how do I know your community's on board with this? And it's not just you two people coming to me or whoever it is. And so they'll ask you to conduct outreach unless you've already done it. And to make sure that generally, they're not going to want to bring something forward that people are not broadly supportive of. If there's widespread support, they would introduce it into the county council process, which includes a public hearing and a more opportunity to put input. If that were to ever occur, then if it passed, there would be an assessment, and that has to be done before early December, and then work would begin the next year. The last funding option is Snohomish County. So surface water management is the department that we're part of. As we mentioned before, things like fragrant water lily are so widespread, we really can't work on all lakes. And just to try and help figure out how we can be most effective aiding associations like yourself to do projects like this, we came up with some criteria. And the first is that you must have a lake association. You must have a petition of interest by 20% of parcels to start the process. And if you approve a plan, you need to pay for all remaining costs after grants. If you do all those things, the Snohomish County will contribute our staff time for project management and communications. And I should mention also that, okay, I just blanked. I don't know what else I was going to mention. So if I come to it later, I will bring that back. So now if we revisit this chart, as I mentioned, if you look at that first yellow line, this project management and communications, if we can assume that we were going to get grants, the community was going to pay for the rest of it, that's a contribution of $91,000 from surface water management and our staff time over those 5 years. That would also include permitting for the project. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Part of the reason that we came up with this framework to help community associations is it's very difficult for community associations to do this work on their own for 2 reasons. One, as I mentioned before, you have to be an entity to apply for grants. And 2, if you're trying to do something holistically like fragrant water lily, you need to have a permit to treat it all. In order to get a permit, you have to have express permissions from the landowner and be the bottomlands landowner. And so it's really difficult on that one in particular. So this is why we've been directed to kind of help lake associations do this. Okay, so back to costs. So this is the total project cost. What we did, just to give you an idea of how much it would cost if you broke it up by parcel, there are 98 shoreline parcels bordering Lake Serene. So if you just broke it up evenly between those 98 parcels, this would be the total cost over that, of 5-year cost of $2,765, or an average of $553 per year. Now, if we go with a scenario where we were able to attain that $75,000 grant and the county paid the $91,000 in staff time, this is what your remaining costs are, which is $110,000 over the 5 years. So if you took that $110,000 and divided it equally by 98 each year, this is what you would get. So over 5 years, a financial investment of the community would be $1,122, or an average of $225 a year. So I think that's what a lot of people coming to this meeting probably wanted to know, is what that number might look like of how much of an investment it might take from the community to do this. What are the next steps? So we've done the invasive species map, which is step 1. We developed a draft plan, step 2. We're doing the community outreach right now. So this presentation will be put on our website basically as soon as we can have our IT department give us approval to post it on the county's YouTube, Facebook page. After that, pretty much as we close out the survey, or as we're finishing this meeting, we will be doing, we will be opening the feedback survey. So we'll make all those links live on the website so that you can go in and take the survey. So anybody on this meeting can go take the survey. We sent a mailer to everybody letting them know that the survey would be available afterwards. We've tried to put it on Nextdoor, and we've sent emails to anybody that's subscribed, and we'll send reminders. What I don't have in front of me, and I really failed to put on, is the closing date of that survey. So I will find that information out. We will put it in the chat and say it before the meeting's done. And this is how the survey is going to work. So if people generally approve of the plan as it is with minor changes, you'll basically be voting to approve the plan. If the survey feedback shows that, whoa, we're way off here, we need to really make some big changes to the plan, we would make those changes and then come back to the community for a final vote. So with that, we are going to open it up to questions and discussions. I apologize, I went a little bit slower, but we'll try and get to everybody. We do have some ground rules. We want one person to speak at a time. So if you have a question or a discussion, please raise your hand. Again, that's on the React, or if you can't figure out how to raise it, feel free to chat us. We want you to stay focused on the topics of this meeting. So we're really going to stay focused on invasive plants, not other county or other issues at the lake. Please encourage everyone to participate. To start, we're going to limit to 2 minutes to make sure we get to everybody. If you're on your phone, you can raise your hand by *9 and you can unmute by *6. And if you're not sure how to unmute, we'll unmute you when we recognize you. And Mark just texted me that August 23rd is this close of the survey date. So that's what we have. Okay, so we'll get started on questions.
No questions? Comments?
I mean, yeah, if anybody wants to get in and speak just generally what their first thoughts about the plan are, anything, we'd love to hear from you. I do have a question in my chat. It looks like somebody direct messaged me from Ken. He said, what's the position of the county regarding reducing the accumulated muck? Ken, that's a great question. This is one we've struggled with at Lake Rossiger. The focus of the plan is really on the plant reduction. Once you remove the plants, there will be some natural consolidation of muck, but probably not that much. And so this plan will not address the muck accumulation, unfortunately. It's a really difficult one. It's really difficult to get rid of the muck. One thing I can tell you is those muck blowers, they basically kind of look like sticks with kind of almost like a electric boat motor on it, are not allowed by Fish and Wildlife because then you end up basically blowing the muck to your neighbor's property. There potentially are some promising things with nanobubbles and aerators with nanobubbles that can oxygenate the sediment and reduce muck. And I'm happy to send that information out, but that would not be part of this plan. But happy to provide some of those recommendations. And we have a resident at Lake Rossiger that is reaching out to that manufacturer and is going to be testing that out. So I'm happy to put you in contact with them after I ask for their contact information if you're interested.
We have Steve and Nancy Murphy raising their hand. So if you guys would like to unmute yourselves.
Feel free to turn your camera on too, if you'd like.
I did unmute myself. We've got our camera on.
Great.
Okay. Hey, Marissa, Jen, I just want to say great presentation, really good. I am all for it. I think that it's a good investment on all of our parts, so I'll certainly be helping to approve it. The purple strife that is on the land, what was that in the presentation about? Is there something that we can get to try and eliminate some of that now?
Yeah, in the next, oh, sorry, go ahead, is that it?
That was it.
Okay, so the purple loosestrife, great question. We actually are working on this at Lake Rossiger right now. In the next couple days, we're actually going to be publishing a new, probably mid next week, a new website for purple loosestrife specifically, and that's going to have a fact sheet on how to control it, and as well as some links to videos. So it's not quite ready, but when we do our message out to Lake Rossiger, there's no reason we couldn't send it out to all the Lake Serene residents as well.
Well, I would certainly like to see it because we've got some in our, in our code. So,
well, we definitely send it to you, and if you sign up for those email alerts, sorry, there's a motorcycle or something, we will we'll send it out to that email alert list as well.
Okay.
Yeah, people want to start early. That's great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions or general comments?
I see that David is raising his hand.
Yeah. I was listening to Marisa. On the parcel, you say it was 98. Parcel is paying for this project. Is that true?
So there are 98 parcels around Lake Serene. So at this point, if we have a plan, this is more about whether we want to do this plan or not. The next step would be figuring out whether we want to, how we want to pay for it. So one option would be to do that surface water fee where, the parcels around the lake pay a certain amount to do that. This is not the decision point at this point. It'll be up to the community once the plan is approved to decide how they want to pay for that. It could be private donations, it could be other things as well, but that is a viable way that other lakes have did it, and that's why I presented it.
My real question is, we live in the outer part of the lake. Is that our concern too?
Yeah, and that's one of the things, and maybe Ben or Mark, if you want to jump in here, that would be a question. So for example, at Lake Rossiger, when they established their fee, they have a I don't remember what it is. I'm just going to say $100 fee for people that live on the lake shoreline. But there's people that live across the street that really care about and see the lake too, and they pay like $20 or $30. So that would be up to the community to see if you want to include people just on the lake shoreline or close to the lake shoreline. That would be a good question for the community to decide, because whatever you decide, though, you'd want to make sure that people are generally on board with it. So thanks for coming, especially,
Yeah.
by the way.
Yeah, my neighbor showed me the flyer. I said I didn't get one, so he copied one for me. That's why we're on. So
Yeah, and maybe that was probably our mistake, because we didn't clarify with it earlier on the mailer. Who we sent the mailer to is the same people that are paying currently for the drainage
yeah, okay.
issue. So yeah, in future, it sounds like it might be a good idea to send mailers to more of the community around the lake, not just people that live right on it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Yeah.
Will it take 100% agreement for all parcels, or is it strictly democratic? Is it 51% or?
That's a great question. So to pass the plan or approve it of what we're going to call like finalized, it would take 50% of the people providing feedback to approve it. If it came to whether you wanted to set up that surface water management fee, I don't think there's a hard and set number. It's more if the county council person feels that there's broad enough support. So I think at the Lake Rossiger meeting that they had with our county council person, I think it was 80% said yes. And they felt comfortable with that. Jen, can you think of any others?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. I remember doing a community meeting for the Goodwin Shoecraft aquatic plant fee surcharge. They also have aquatic plant work done, mostly Eurasian water milfoil. And I think it was about 60 to 70% were in favor, and just the overall temperature of the room that council member Nearing he felt comfortable bringing it forward to council. So once it goes to council, all of council votes on it, and there's a public hearing, so anyone can come and speak for or against it, and all of council decides if this is a good idea. So it's not just one person making a decision, it's just one of the council members bringing it forward.
Yeah, and what we found generally is that the rest of the council is pretty supportive when there's a lot of support from other landowners, especially in a situation where you had council members that were typically very anti new fees. Bringing it forward, it was a little easier to pass maybe than others.
This will be included in property owner taxes each year?
That would be if you decide to go that route to fund it. The first step is to decide if you want to approve the plan. The second step would then be to decide if you wanted to institute a per property tax. So on that survey, you will find we did ask a question about people's interest and willingness to pay that, to give guidance to the community group if they should pursue that or not. But right now it's not a decision based on that, but it could very likely lead to that if there's broad support of the plan. Does that help?
Yes.
I saw that there was hands up and then they went down. So do you still have a question? I think it was Karen and Todd, maybe?
Yeah, that was my question, is how many people would have to agree?
Oh, okay. Great. Yeah, that's something we should have included. So thank you for pointing that out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, do we have any other questions?
Maybe we could just do a quick.
The Shaddocks have some questions.
Oh, okay. Do you want us to, maybe we could unmute?
Yeah,
All
can
right,
you,
perfect. I can hear you. We can see you and hear you.
kind of more directed at Ben, really, but I'm assuming that there'll be a community meeting before terribly long. In the past years, they've let us use the fire station, and I think on one or two occasions, even the elementary school. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I was hoping there was going to be a lot more people on this meeting than are here, so maybe people are just going to watch it later. But yeah, I mean, if the community wants a meeting and is willing to show up, then absolutely. I'm happy to coordinate that and figure out where we would do it at.
One thing that we might be able to do to help that is after it closes, the survey closes on the 23rd, we'll obviously communicate to the advisory committee those results, and we'll publish them to the website. So you'll get a real good idea if you've had a good turnout or not in terms of, responses, if whether that would be a good next step, or if, it might be that just people aren't here but are going to respond to the survey. If that makes sense. I don't know, Ben, what do you think?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And like I said, if there's a desire to have a meeting, I'm happy to coordinate it.
Okay, it looks like Lori has her hand up.
Yeah, wanted to see if we can get the information about you called them microbubblers, is that what you said, or oxygen? What were those?
The nanobubblers?
Nanobubblers, yes.
Would you mind putting in the message or chatting me your email? Anybody that wants microbubbler, and just put microbubbler in it, and then I can send that out. And I should say with the microbubblers, I've asked for data specifically on sediment removal, and I haven't gotten much back yet. So I think there might be some opportunity. I think that is promising based on the data for other applications I've seen, but don't take my word as a well-tested thing. I think it's one option that's out there that looks promising, but we have not seen the kind of scientific published results on, and I'll put that in the email too.
Okay, we have Ken has his hand up next.
Ken, do you want us to unmute you? I'll look and see, because I know you were having problems earlier.
Ken looks unmuted.
Okay. If you can't speak and want to type your question, feel free to message or put it in the Q&A. Okay, so I got from Ken that he's also interested in microbubblers. And he says too much to type. So Ken, if you aren't able to we'll give you some more time, and feel free to jump in at any time if you get unmuted. If not, if you want to give us a call tomorrow, I can put my email. I'll send you my phone number, or anybody can have my number. It's on our website, but it's also, Jen, can you put that in the chat or Q&A?
Yep.
Feel free to call and ask questions tomorrow if you have them. One other thing about the micro or nano bubblers is you probably wouldn't want to do that until after lilies are under control, because you'll want those rhizomes to decay in order for that to work. So, okay, any other questions?
For the sake of the video, there was one answered question on the Q&A, if we want to read that out loud.
That'd be great if you could do that, yeah.
Let me finish typing our email address. So you could reach all of us at the Lakes group at any time using the email lakes@snowco.org, especially in the summertime, as all of us are intermittently taking vacations. So if you want to email questions, that's a great way to do it. Okay, so the question that was answered on the Q&A was, how does hand cutting affect long-term eradication of water lilies given their rhizomes would be left behind? Megan did respond. She said, cutting the pads prevents lilies from photosynthesizing. They keep using the sugars in their stored rhizomes and try to send up new pads. If you keep cutting the pads, then eventually they will run out of sugars and die. So you do have to be aggressive and cut 3 to 4 times a growing season and just keep after it.
Yeah, it's going to take multiple years. And we used to say 3 to 4, but other people have told us 4 to 6. So if anybody here has experience doing that and wants to share, feel free. One thing that if we were to go this route and start, you would want to, if you want your pads to be treated, you should refrain from cutting them until they're treated. And they would typically be treated twice in one season. But you can definitely do cutting control first. So Ken put a message, I want to push for herbicides as a last resort, give mechanical means a try first. And so I'm not sure which plant Ken is referring to. So let's maybe just go through plant by plant and those options. So when we're talking about lilies, mechanical means are definitely a potential application, and individual landowners, to my understanding, have already tried this. And it's difficult to do lake-wide and cause eradication. So that's why the cutting was not chosen. We did look very clearly and closely at harvesting, but because of the extreme cost and the difficulty in shallow areas, it was not chosen. And so that's why herbicides was selected for that, plant. Thank you. And slender arrowhead, similarly, as we said, we tried at Rosker to do the non-chemical method first, the diver assisted suction harvesting. It was effective, but it's very cost ineffective. So, but if that's the feedback that from the community that they would rather spend more, and the cost estimates for that are in the plan, feel free to give that feedback in the community, and that can be something that's deviated and changed. As I mentioned, it was about a half an acre for 6 days of diving. I don't remember offhand what that 6 days of diving is. I think it was 36,000. So if you did that over time, you could start to push into, the 6 acres that are covered there, but you would probably have to dash the certain areas. So it would probably take longer as well, because of those tubers, they can come back. The pondweed, the curly leaf pondweed, was chosen to do diver hand pulling. So that is not an herbicide option. And the shoreline plants, most of the treatment for that is mechanical control of digging up as well as the first option. So we did, one thing we didn't really go into because it's a little in the weeds, is that we did use an invasive or a pest management, integrated pest management approach to this plan per county policy, where we're always looking for the cultural control methods first, the cutting, the other things, then moving up the line with the chemicals as a last resort. So we did really try and take that approach. Some people definitely are in the arena if they don't want chemicals for any reason though. And if you're in that and the community is in that majority, then you need to provide that feedback so that can be changed. So great message there.
Okay, Karen and Todd have their hand up again if they want to unmute themselves.
Hi, yes. So you said that we should not cut water lilies until they're eradicated via whatever way we decide. Is that the same with the arrowleaf?
So just to be real clear, if you want to cut the lilies now, feel free to go out and cut them as much as you want. I'm just saying, if it's in the season where the plan is approved and we have funding and we're moving forward, that might be the one time you want to wait to cut, is just in that season. Okay. So that way they can be treated, because that will go into the rhizome and it will kill the plant completely more. But for now, feel free to cut as much as you want. Slender arrowhead can also be controlled by a hand pulling. So in those shallow areas, feel free to go out there and pull it. As you do it, try and dig up those tubers. That'll prevent regrowth. So that's what we'd recommend for those. So feel free to get out there. It's just a slender arrowhead. As it gets deeper, you kind of need to be a diver to do that.
Is the arrowhead, are the tubers do they, because I have been hand pulling them and it looks like it's just a big root. Is that the tuber? It's not
they're little, they're called, the common ones, the other species are called duck potatoes. So they are like little balls. They're kind of tiny. Some plants have them very developed, others don't. So you might pull them up and just see roots. You might then see more of the developed tubers, especially later in the season, just like a potato plant would,
Potato.
but not that big. They're very tiny comparatively.
Oh, thank you very much.
And Karen, this is Ben here. I just want to add in on that slender arrowhead. I've been pulling it in front of my house, and I have a lot of muck as well. And as I pull out some of the more mature plants, I'm getting they're like a vermicelli noodle, or like very, very thin, long rhizome that's like 3 feet long. So I have noticed where I've pulled where I thought I got the whole plant, the next year I have a bunch of little babies showing up as well.
Yeah,
So,
same.
Yeah.
I've been getting after them for the last few years and have noticed a significant reduction close to our shore where I can reach, but now I'm still at it.
One thing to mention, our website, we have a aquatic plants page on our website, and we have a guide to identifying native and invasive plants on there. So you're always welcome to take a look in there. There is a question in the chat that came to me: is pondweed also one of the invasive species we can control? So there are like 20 species of pondweed. So the curly leaf pondweed is the only invasive in the lake. There is a lot of large leaf pondweed, which is a native plant. It's probably our most common native plant and one of the most important plants for fish. So you definitely want to keep that. As I mentioned, there is some ability to remove native plants that Fish and Wildlife allows. And Jen, maybe if you could put in the link to our aquatic plants page, you can read through that. There is some very limited control you can do of native plants under that. It serves as your permit. So you can control 10 feet corridor basically of native plants. So let's say you want to have a clear area by your dock that can be for boating or for fishing or for swimming, so you can get out to clear water. That's where you can do the hand cutting and raking of native plants, not just invasive ones. Invasives you're allowed to remove as much as you want, except for the bottom berries, you're limited in the size of those. So you'll want to look at that website, look at that booklet. If you have questions on native plants or you're not sure whether you have a native or invasive, send us a picture at Lakes at Snowco and we can let you know.
Okay, it's 8 o'clock. I think we have time to hear one last comment or question from Dave because he's had his hand up, and then we can wrap up. So Dave, do you want to unmute?
Can't hear you yet, Dave. Not yet. You're unmuted, but oh.
And if you're having trouble with your audio, you could always type the question in.
Yeah, if you see your audio at the bottom, there's a little arrow up, and a lot of computers and monitors these days do consider themselves an audio. So make sure the microphone that you actually want to use is selected.
Dave does have a comment about cutting the water lilies in the Q&A, if you want me to read that.
Yes.
It says, I have hand cut the water lilies around my dock and it worked. As mentioned, you do have to keep after it during the entire growing season, but after 1 or 2 seasons, they don't make it through the winter and don't come back in the spring.
That is very good to hear.
Yeah, that's great feedback to have personal experience. Okay, so so that's kind of wrapping it up. I just did want to give a thank you to the advisory committee volunteers. They asked not to be named. I don't know, I think they're too humble, but thank you to those 4 members, to Tetra Tech and ESA for the plan review, and the Snohomish County staff, and again, Mark Fussell. And thank you all for coming. This most important thing is you go take the survey. In fact, I think we can send the survey or the survey link in the chat right now. I will go online and get that to send to you directly, or at any point you can go to our website. We need like about 15 minutes to make the survey live, and then you can take that survey. Please do encourage your neighbors to take the survey, but also to learn about the plan before they take the survey. So either read it or watch the video. And basically, thank you for attending. So if anybody wants to say anything else, I'll get that survey link for you. It'll take me just 1 second. And
I'm getting it now.
You're getting it now? Okay. And yeah, so if anybody wants to say anything else, feel free, and we'll put that in, and you can sign off by doing that. But yeah, sorry, it'll take, should have had that ready. Yeah. Thank you all for coming. Are you finding it, Jen, or do you need me to grab it?
I sent it in the chat. It's
Was that
not,
the project website or the survey link?
there's another link below it.
Oh, okay.
So that's not obvious. Let me try it again.
Okay, yeah. So where it says forms, if you click on that, you can take the survey right now. And yeah, so thanks to everyone for coming, and we're gonna close the meeting out. We'll give you one more, we're gonna stop the recording now and we'll give you one more minute to get the survey link.
Thank you.
Thank you.